Hello, this is Dr. Do again. This video is alphabetic list problems on letter P. Today I'm going to talk about actually potassium and its clinical or medical significance. You probably already know, I think I had a previous video talk about the hyper or hypokalemia, which means briefly mentioned about the clinical oriented increase or decrease potassium in the blood, and the major causes and the consequences. Today I probably integrate those clinical pictures and with the fundamental knowledge about this potassium and what is the function of this potassium and how to replace it, how to maintain and chronically replace it, especially for the older people. So let me just bring up, first of all, the emergency situation associated with this potassium in the blood. Usually for the hyper or hypokalemia, it's not occurred with healthy people unless there's some either acute or chronic. Usually it's chronic kidney disease or chronic diarrhea, vomiting. So that's probably the major cause of this hypokalemia or hyperkalemia. So this, if that's the case, then if anyone had this previous, I just mentioned conditions, kidney disease or long-term going diarrhea or vomiting, or there's some psychological disease like anorexia and bulimia. So if that's the case, and then you develop this sudden loss of strength, or particularly if you feel the heart beating in a funny way, not regular, either too fast or too slow or irregular. If that's the case, I think it's really need to see a physician as soon as possible. Because if this keep going, then could the consequences, if for the non-corrected hyper or hypokalemia, the consequences is the sudden death, the heart just couldn't maintain the regular rhythm or couldn't maintain the strength. Just that's the worst scenario. The significance of this disturbance of potassium, and not like sodium. Sodium can affect nervous system and also the muscular system. The sodium affect the heart is different from potassium. So this is in terms of the mechanism I'm going to explain to you. So this is the emergency situation. Can you manage at home? It depends. If for a healthy person, particularly for older people with anorexia, do not take enough food, and also even though you're healthy, if you do not take enough potassium, then has some consequences. If that's the case, healthy elderly develop some symptoms like feel not strong enough, lost muscle strength and constipation. If that's the case, try some potassium, because it's not a common cause for elderly constipation and weakness. So this is about the two end of emergency situation or minor, and can try it at home. However, for the replacement of calcium, definitely it's need to be cautious. Cannot to over replaced and cannot be too fast replaced. So probably a couple times a week, take a couple pills of the potassium from the over-the-counter. That might do, but better to under guidance of your physician. So anyway, the potassium. Let me just explain why we need potassium. Potassium actually it's quite. I think it's not very well addressed nutrients, elements. We take the sodium all the time because of the sodium, the salt. But potassium also comes with food. The significance of potassium is as important as sodium because they are balanced in many ways. Potassium and sodium are the balanced opposite to each other in terms of the concentration of this intercellular or extracellular, or the action potential and the resting potential. Those are the elements to maintain the function of the cell. For example, the muscle or heart or nervous cells, in order to generate the signal or contraction, has to have this action potential, which is by all means need sodium to rapidly influx of the inside of the cell, cause this surge of the electricity. At the same time, if the potassium is the resting potential to maintain the tone, the basic level of the tone. So it's hard to explain. If the potassium is not enough, then need extra sodium to actually does not do the work. So anyway, if the potassium is not enough, the cell really lost the potential or too excited. Or if the potassium is too much, then the threshold is higher, need more activity to surge this action potential. This is very fundamental biophysics, biochemistry, biophysiology anyway. But the significance is the potassium important for the nerve cells, particularly for the muscle cells. The muscle cells including the heart muscle, the skeletal muscle, and also the smooth muscle, which we know the heart muscle is in the heart, skeletal muscle is for the extremities, and the smooth muscle, which are major component of the digestive system, the stomach, the small intestine, and large intestine. So, having said that, if the potassium is not enough, hypokalemia, for the physicians, if you go to the office, they all medical trained professions, they think the priority list, the worst and the most dangerous is the heart, because if the heart has too much potassium or not enough potassium, cause this irregular heart rate and arrhythmia, and could had very serious impact, sudden death, for example, or asystole, or bradycardia, or irregular beat. However, there's some subtle hypokalemia. If the potassium is not very low but not very high, and cause this muscle weakness, and also the smooth muscle lost the mobility, lost the strength of mobility. So that's what I mean is in the older people, why they tend to have this constipation. First of all, decrease the physical activity, probably just the sedative lifestyle, or because the muscle weakness, they do not want to walk, do not want to do anything. And this could be caused by the subtle low level of potassium. And on top of that, the decrease of the GI gastrointestinal mobility. So I think this is not there's no study on this, and it's not very well addressed. But I think it's need to really, for those, if you're healthy older people without heart disease, without any conditions, you can take potassium supplement. But if you have heart disease, the take-home message is you cannot just take potassium. Particularly for those heart disease or kidney disease, do not take potassium without advice from your physician. For the healthy older people and for healthy young people, I'm talking about physically healthy but have some lost appetite or trying to lose weight, limited food intake. For those people, take some potassium might be beneficial. However, for the potassium intake, I think because we take it with the food and the body really have a way to balance it. My advice, do not take too much. You do not have to take every day, probably a couple times a week. So this is about the video about the significance of potassium. I think it's quite ignored or not well mentioned, because there is some previous, probably several decades ago, the potassium replacement caused the loss of death. That's the time when we do not know how to replace potassium, and too fast it caused. But now I think still it probably needs more attention. But the take-home message is for the healthy older people and young people lost appetite for a while, or keep vomiting or long-term diarrhea, then you can consider to take potassium, but doesn't have to be regular at a daily basis. So I'm going to stop here, and for those who have heart disease, kidney disease, talk to your physician before you do anything, before you take potassium. So this is about this video. I'm going to stop here, and thank you for watching. I'll see you next time.